Yo, what's up guys? It's Noah here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a first look at the Week 4 NFL slate on Draftkings. We're going to preview this Week 4 main slate, give you guys kind of a first look, what I do like, taking a first look at this slate on Tuesday. We're going to go position by position, quarterback through tight end, just kind of hit on some plays that stand out at first look, and as we do go through each position, we will build out an early lineup, kind of a first look GPP lineup, talk through some stacks I like, some quarterback receiver stacks, look at some correlated mini stacks that we can do as well. But before we do get started with the breakdown, as always, if you guys do enjoy these DFS videos, if they do help you out, make sure you hit that like button down below. I always appreciate the likes. Hit that subscribe button if you have not yet. And if you guys are new to the channel, if you have never checked out PrizePicks before, we are partnered up with PrizePicks. You guys can sign up for PrizePicks. You can use my promo code NOAH. When you do sign up, you will get your first deposit matched up to $100 when you sign up for PrizePicks with my promo code. And for those of you that have never heard of PrizePicks, they are a player prop site. They're a DFS site more focused on player projections. So it's a little bit different than DraftKings and FanDuel and these other DFS sites where you build out a lineup and you enter contests and you're playing against other people. Well, for PrizePicks, it's just you versus their projections. So you can see some of the projections they already have posted. They have stuff up for Thursday Night Football. They have stuff up already for the Sunday slate. They even have some stuff up for Monday Night Football as well. You can take a look at all their props, all the different categories they have available. Obviously, I'm making this video on Tuesday, so there's not a ton on the board right now. But if you take a look at the board on like Saturday night, Sunday morning, there will be a ton of props up, and they'll have props up for pretty much every single game. Pretty much every meaningful player will be on the board. So take a look at PrizePicks, guys, and if you want to sign up, again, use that promo code NOAH. When you do, you will get your first deposit matched up to $100. But let's talk through this Week 4 slate, guys. I do want to first start off, take a look at some of the totals for this week so we can kind of get an idea of what are expected to be the highest scoring games. Not necessarily saying we just have to load up on those games, but we kind of have a similar situation to what we did last week. We saw last week the Chargers and Vikings game was clearly, kind of the best game on the slate in terms of a fantasy game environment, in terms of expected points scored. And that's kind of the case this week with the Bills and Dolphins game, because if we take a look at totals this week, this game has the highest total on the slate by 6 points, 53.5 total right now between the Dolphins and Bills. Next highest game is the Chargers and Raiders with a 47.5 total. So those are definitely, especially this Bills-Dolphins game is going to be a game that a lot of people target this week. It's obviously a game we'll talk about when we go position by position. But then you do have the Chargers-Raiders, which sets up as a pretty fantasy-friendly game environment. That game's being played indoors as well, which is obviously always good for fantasy upside. Then you have Bears, Broncos, 46 total, 45.5 total between the Panthers and Vikings, 45.5 total between the Colts and the Rams, 44.5 total between the Eagles and Commanders, and then you have some of the lower total games. Cardinals 49ers, 44 total, 43.5 total between the Cowboys and the Patriots. And these are games down here we're probably not going to be getting a ton of exposure to, like Texans and Steelers, 42 total. Titans and Bengals, I think, could kind of be a sneaky game. I do like some guys on the Bengals side that we'll talk about, but that game does have a lower total. Ravens, Browns, divisional battle, 41 total. And then lowest total game on the slate right now is Saints and Buccaneers, 39.5 total. But yeah, guys, those are kind of like the totals for this week, kind of the games are expected to be the highest scoring. Let's take a look at the positions, and let's start off at quarterback. We're going to go, again, position by position, kind of just hit on some plays that stand out to me at first look. And at the top of the quarterback position, there's a couple guys that really stand out here. I think Josh Allen is probably going to be the highest projected quarterback on this slate, especially because he's playing in that great game environment against Miami, that game that has a 53.5 total. Pretty good matchup as well, I think, for Josh Allen here. We haven't seen huge fantasy games from Josh Allen yet. Did have 22 DK points last week, 23 DK points week 2 against the Raiders. This feels like one of those games where we could finally see like a 28, 29, 30 DraftKings point game from Josh Allen. I think for like cash games, I think Josh Allen's probably going to project pretty well this week and is someone you're definitely going to be considering in cash games. Expect Jalen Hurts to come in with lower ownership this week. I think he'll be more of a GPP option. Justin Herbert, once again, I have a lot of interest in, 7,800. His price tag's coming up, but pretty good matchup here against the Raiders. Another really good game environment. That game, second highest total on the slate. And then you got like some GPP options like, Lamar Jackson, I think is going to be pretty low owned in that game against Cleveland. Low total game there. Tua should get some ownership this week. He's been great. Obviously, that's a great game environment against Buffalo. So I think Tua, in play for GBPs. Kirk Cousins against Carolina, I'll probably pass on at that price tag. I would just rather get up to some of those other guys. Kirk would only be in play for me unless I was like stacking him with Justin Jefferson or something in GBPs. In the mid-range, I don't love a ton in the mid-range this week, at least not at first look. I think my favorite play here would probably be Joe Burrow. I know Burrow was not great Monday night against the Rams, only had 9 Draftkings points. But what's good to see is that he did throw the ball 49 times. Now, he was very inefficient as a passer, only completed 53% of his passes. But the Bengals were letting Burrow drop back and throw a ton, which is obviously good for his fantasy upside. So in a good matchup against Tennessee, a team that typically you have to beat through the air, Tennessee's a really tough team to run on. So I think if the Bengals are going to have success in this game, if they're going to be able to put up points, they're going to have to do it through the air. So at 6,500, I do kind of like Joe Burrow for tournaments this week. I think he's in play. Deshaun Watson's kind of cheap at 6K. Looked pretty good last week. Don't love that game environment against Baltimore, but I could see stacking up Deshaun Watson with like Amari Cooper in tournaments. I think without Nick Chubb, the Browns are really going to have to lean on Deshaun Watson more than they probably want to. They're typically kind of a run-first team, but I could definitely see the Browns airing it out a little bit more just kind of the rest of the season without Nick Chubb. But then if we're talking about value at quarterback, value is not like great this week. I don't love a ton for cheap. I mean, you got some guys in good matchups. Like Brock Purdy's in a good matchup. I think he's a solid value play. Not a guy that I love playing in tournaments, but I could see going there in cash games just kind of like as a salary saver. I think Brock Purdy's floor is very solid. I do question the ceiling a little bit. Matthew Stafford, decent matchup against the Colts, but Stafford's another guy that I just don't think has the highest ceiling. CJ Stroud at home against Pittsburgh, I think it's like okay. The guy that I do want to talk about for cheap is Jameis Winston. So we did see Derek Carr get injured last week, and Winston did take over for Carr. We don't have any update on Carr's status as of now. Like I said, I'm recording this video on Tuesday. Carr, he got slammed on his shoulder, and it did not look good. So I think there's a pretty good chance Derek Carr doesn't play this week. And Jameis Winston is someone that we have seen show a lot of fantasy upside. Now, that was back when he was on the Buccaneers in a different offense. With this Saints team, they'll probably be a little bit more, they probably won't let Winston air it out as much as he did when he was with Tampa Bay. But Jameis Winston is someone that does have upside for fantasy. He is a guy that'll go out there and sling it if the Saints will let him. At 5,300, if we're looking for a value quarterback, I think Jameis Winston is one of my favorite values, assuming that he winds up starting. Again, we'll have to keep an eye on Derek Carr's status, but if Winston is the starter this week, I do have some interest in him as a value play. I know that game environment is not great. It's a low total game, but Winston is super cheap, and he's got good weapons in New Orleans. I could definitely see him putting up a solid price or a solid score for his salary. So he would be interesting to me if he winds up starting. But that's really it for quarterback. I don't see too much else down here that I have a ton of interest in. So if we're taking a look at kind of who we can start off our first look lineup with, the guy that really stood out to me, once again, I think we've took him in our first look lineup every single week so far this season, but Justin Herbert at 7,800, I like a lot this week. I think, he might come in with lower ownership than a guy like Josh Allen. I think if I had to guess, Josh Allen would be kind of the chalk play at quarterback this week if people are paying up. So for GBPs, I do like getting a little different going with a guy like Justin Herbert. And there's a lot of ways that we can stack up Herbert. We'll talk about Keenan Allen. We'll talk about Josh Palmer. And there's plenty of options on the other side of that game that we can run back our Herbert stacks with, whether it be Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, or someone like Josh Jacobs. So let's start off our lineup with Justin Herbert, and then when we get to wide receiver, we'll look at some stacks that we can play with Herbert. But looking at the running back position now, at the top of the running back position, there's guys obviously at the top here that look great. I mean, CMC should crush here against Arizona. Price tag's very high at 9,200, but man, I mean, feels like the guy's just basically locked in for 20 DraftKings points a week. And if you do get that ceiling game from CMC and he goes for 30, 35 DK points, well, you're probably going to need him in GBPs. Feels like a guy you definitely want to be considering in cash games. I haven't obviously built out like any cash game lineup. It's Tuesday, but I would think CMC is going to be someone you're probably going to want to try and prioritize in cash games this week. Great spot there against Arizona. We're going to need to monitor Austin Eckler's status. Eckler has been out the last 2 games. We don't have any update yet whether he's going to be back for this game or if he's going to be back for their next game. It looks like he's possibly going to return for this game against the Raiders, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. Obviously, if Eckler returns, that's a slight downgrade for guys like Keenan Allen and Josh Palmer, but not enough of a downgrade to where they would be like out of play for me. You got to remember that the Chargers will be without Mike Williams for the rest of the season, so there's a lot a lot of targets available without Mike Williams and potentially without Eckler as well if he doesn't come back for this week. But if Eckler does play, he's someone you could consider in GBPs. Tough spot for Tony Pollard against the Patriots, but Tony Pollard just kind of similar to McCaffrey and Eckler. I mean, he's just matchup proof. He's going to get all the volume. He's a super efficient running back. He's going to get usage in the passing game. Even in a tough matchup, I think Pollard still looks very solid and is firmly in play. Josh Jacobs is someone that I do like a lot this week. 7,100. I know the price tag's kind of high, but Jacobs is getting all the volume right now at running back for the Raiders. They're really not involving, anyone else. And if I just should have pulled up the snap counts, but I'm going to pull them up real quick. So if we look at the snap counts last week for the Raiders in that game against that Sunday night game against the Steelers, Josh Jacobs did play 82% of the snaps in that game. He got 20 touches, 17 carries, and 5 targets. Their first 2 games, well, at least not week 1, but week 2 against Buffalo was a massive blowout. Horrible game for the Raiders. I don't even think Jacobs played the whole fourth quarter in that game. Week 1, was a kind of a lower scoring game against Denver, but Jacobs did get 21 touches in that game. In their 2 competitive games this season, we've seen 20-plus touches for Josh Jacobs. He's going to get all the volume. It's a pretty good matchup against the Chargers. The Chargers were pretty bad against the run last season. Now, so far this season, I don't think the Chargers have been as bad against the run, but this is a team you can run on. It's a good game environment, high total game. And if we're going to be stacking up Justin Herbert with some of his pass catchers, I would like to do a run back on the other side of that game. So Jacobs in tournaments, I do like a lot, and he correlates with our Herbert stack that we're going to build out. So I do like plugging in Josh Jacobs to our first look lineup as a kind of our pay-up running back. And then looking at some of the other running backs this week, there's a lot of guys that are in play. Derrick Henry should be really low owned. I guess you could go there if you wanted to against Cincinnati, but I don't love the spot for Henry. We obviously saw what Raheem Mostert did last week, had a massive game. Not the best spot here against Buffalo, but again, great game environment, high total game. I think Mostert is fine to go to, but I would temper expectations a little bit after that game last week. Really tough spot for Joe Mixon against Tennessee. Tough matchup, but Mixon getting all the volume at running back right now for Cincinnati, so he's kind of like a volume play. James Cook, I think, is going to project pretty well. Really good matchup for him against Miami. Great game environment, and James Cook's been getting a lot of the volume for Buffalo at the running back position. Now, when they've gotten down to the goal line, it's been Latavius Murray and Damian Harris getting a lot of the goal line touches, which is kind of annoying. But James Cook's getting most of the opportunity except when they get to the goal line. He's getting good usage, though, both on the ground and in the passing game. The price tag's fair. The matchup's great. I think James Cook looks pretty good this week. I think he will be pretty popular. So you'll have to decide whether you want to eat that chalk in GBPs. But I definitely think James Cook's going to project well at his salary. Do have some interest in him. But the guy that really stood out to me at first look was Alvin Kamara. I'm going to be very interested to see what Kamara's ownership is this week, in tournaments, because it's obviously his first game of the season. He's coming back from suspension. But 6,100 is really cheap for Alvin Kamara for a guy that we know has really good fantasy upside, is a guy that can be efficient on the ground, can handle a big workload, and is going to get a lot of usage in the passing game. Whether it's Derek Carr or Jameis Winston playing at quarterback, I don't know if that's much of a difference for Kamara. I think Carr being at quarterback is probably better for Kamara because Carr, he'll target the running backs more, whereas Jameis Winston doesn't target his running backs a ton. But either way, if we're getting a fully healthy Alvin Kamara, coming in as the starter for this game at only 6,100, I know the game environment's not great. I know the matchup probably isn't the best either. It's a low total game. But we're not going to see Alvin Kamara at 6,100 pretty much, I would say, the rest of the season. This is a guy that's going to be priced in the upper 6Ks, probably in the 7K range for most of the season. And I would assume he's going to be fully healthy, ready to go. It's not like he was injured. He's just suspended. So as the lead running back for the Saints, with not a ton of competition behind him for touches, Jamal Williams is out right now, so it's going to be Tony Jones and Keandre Miller kind of backing up Kamara. I don't expect either one of those guys to take a ton of opportunity away from Kamara. So I like plugging in Kamara as our first look, kind of running back, our RB2, I guess. And I think his ownership is going to be lower than someone like James Cook, for example. So I think Kamara makes a lot of sense as a pivot off of Cook in that same price range. Not saying that Cook's a bad play by any means, but I could definitely see his ownership being really high this week. And Kamara, I think, is going to project pretty similarly to Cook and could come in with a lot less ownership. So like Kamara quite a bit as a early running back play. And then some other running backs we could look to kind of in this 5K, 6K range. There's a lot of guys that I think stand out here. Kyron Williams just going to get all the opportunity at running back for the Rams. He's been getting a ton of opportunity both on the ground and through the air. Matchup against the Colts, I think, is okay at 6K. No issue going to Kyron Williams this week. Similar situation for Zach Moss. He's just been getting all the opportunity at running back for the Colts. In week 1, 22 touches. Last week, 32 touches. He's been playing like almost every single snap. I mean, if you look at the snaps in that week 2 game against Houston, he actually did play every single snap in that game. But last week against Baltimore, he still played 76% of the snaps. So, yeah, Zach Moss, someone I like a lot at 6K. And then Alexander Madison at 5,800, I think looks really good as well in that matchup against Carolina. I think Madison projects well this week. He's firmly in play. If you want to go to some other guys in that game, like on the other side, I think Miles Sanders looks pretty good at 5,800. He's had a really good workload with the Panthers. He's been their clear RB1. And even a guy like DeAndre Swift, we saw what DeAndre Swift did Monday night against Tampa Bay. Although Philadelphia does like to utilize multiple running backs, I think Swift has kind of earned the RB1 role for Philadelphia right now, and I think Gainwell's going to back him up. So even though this Philadelphia team is going to use multiple running backs, I think Swift still probably projects to see like 13 to 15 touches, and he's been very efficient on the ground so far this season. Obviously, he's playing with a great offensive line, probably the best offensive line he's ever played with. So at 5,700, I'm definitely interested in DeAndre Swift in that 5K range. And then there's some other guys down here that I think are fine plays, like Rachaad White is fine. He's going to get volume. Jerome Ford is fine at 5,400. He had a big game last week. Price tag came up a little bit, but I think he's fine to go to. If Austin Eckler doesn't return, we could go back to Josh Kelly. Josh Kelly has been terrible the last 2 games without Austin Eckler, but it's a good matchup again against the Raiders. He's still cheap. I don't mind going back to Kelly if Austin Eckler doesn't come back this week. But that's pretty much it for the running back position. I think we kind of covered all the plays here that stand out to me. So let's move on to wide receiver now. And, wide receiver, kind of similar to the top of the running back position. There's a lot of guys at the top you could pay up for. Justin Jefferson, 9,600. Probably going to be a tough guy to prioritize in like cash games this week. But for tournaments, Jefferson's always fine to go to. Tyreek Hill just been incredible lately. Great matchup, or I would say great game environment. Don't know if the matchup's great, but I think great game environment against Buffalo. Should be a high-scoring game. We'll have to see if Jalen Waddle returns this week, but if Waddle remains out, I mean, Tyreek's going to project for a massive target share. He got a ton of targets last week. He's fine to pay up for. You got Steph Diggs in that same game environment against Miami. Really like Steph Diggs. I think stacking him up with Josh Allen makes a lot of sense. But then we got our, kind of like our plays that we're looking to in this Raiders and Chargers game. And, we talked about Justin Herbert as our quarterback play. We've already plugged him into our first look lineup. If we're going to be stacking up Justin Herbert with some of his pass catchers, I mean, the guy we're going to be looking to right now is Keenan Allen. We saw what Keenan Allen did last week against Minnesota in that great game environment. 20 targets, 18 catches, 215 yards, just an absurd game. He also threw a touchdown in that game, had almost 50 DraftKings points. Keenan Allen has been amazing so far this season. He's always been a very talented receiver. If he stays healthy, I mean, he could post some elite numbers this season, especially with Mike Williams out for the rest of the season. And without Mike Williams, Keenan Allen is going to project for a massive target share every single week. It's a really good matchup against the Raiders, good game environment, and the price tag on Keenan Allen didn't really move. I mean, he only got priced up $300. So I love stacking up Keenan Allen with Justin Herbert. I know that's probably going to be kind of a chalky stack, but we can find ways to get contrarian. So I'm going to stack up Herbert and Allen. And honestly, I like doing a double stack with these Chargers pass catchers because if we take a look at the Chargers, they're going to be without Mike Williams, which is going to open up some value. You've got Josh Palmer at 4K. You've got Quentin Johnson at 3,700. I think both these guys are going to project as pretty good values. If I had to guess, I think Palmer is going to be the guy that plays on the outside, so he's probably going to be locked in for more snaps, whereas Johnson is probably going to play out of the slot. If we take a look at the snaps last week after Mike Williams went down, I think Williams got injured I want to say shortly after halftime, if I remember correctly. Honestly, I can't remember though. But if we look at the snaps last week, so Mike Williams did play 67% of the snaps before he got injured. Josh Palmer, though, went on to play 61% of the snaps, and then Quentin Johnson played 24% of the snaps. So if we're just kind of projecting out playing time, I think Josh Palmer is going to project for more playing time and probably a few more targets than Quentin Johnson will. I think Johnson will probably come in with lower ownership. So if you want to pivot off of Palmer and to Johnson in tournaments, I think that's fine. But I do like double stacking Justin Herbert with Keenan Allen and Josh Palmer. I mean, those are going to be the two guys that get a lot of the targets from Justin Herbert. And this has been a very pass-heavy Chargers offense. They've been throwing the ball a ton. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for both those guys. You could also look to a guy like Gerald Everett. We'll talk more about him when we get to tight end, but he could also be in play. But that's our double stack that I want to go with. So we already have our double stack built, and we've got our run back option. Herbert stacked up with Allen and Palmer, and then run back with Josh Jacobs. Now let's see what we can do with the rest of this lineup and kind of fill out more of we'll try and find more of a correlated lineup. So some correlated mini stacks, if you might say. But Moving on to the rest of the wide receiver position, I mean, there's a lot of guys in play down here in this mid-range and like in the 6K range. For the sake of our lineup, I don't think we're going to really be able to play any of these guys because we're kind of thin on salary. We're going to have to find some value. But there's a lot of guys up here that I think are in solid spots. Like I think Jamar Chase is in a really good spot. He had a great game Monday night. Tennessee's secondary has been very vulnerable this season. They were very vulnerable last season. So I like the matchup a lot for Jamar Chase. I could see going to either Devontae Smith or A.J. Brown in tournaments. If Jameis Winston starts at quarterback for the Saints, I think that's a nice boost for Chris Olave. We know that Winston loves to throw the deep ball, so he's going to be targeting Olave a lot on those deep balls. Olave is someone you could go to maybe in GPPs. You got some other plays in the 6K range that I think are viable, like Puka Nacua. Just had a massive role without Cooper Kupp. Price tag's getting up there, but I think Nakua is still fine. Amari Cooper, I don't mind stacking up with Deshaun Watson as a very low-owned GBP stack. Cooper's been really good this season. Targets have been very good. And, again, without Nick Chubb, I think we could see this Browns offense lean on their passing game a little bit more. So don't mind going to Amari Cooper in that 6K range. In the 5K range, some other plays you could look to, like Tutu Atwell, been playing really well this season. Target share has been great. He's been getting a lot of deep targets as well. Price tag's starting to get up there, but I think Tutu Atwell is still fine. Michael Thomas has been very good this season. Targets have been very consistent for Michael Thomas. We haven't seen much of a ceiling from Michael Thomas, but the floor has been really good. And I think if Jameis Winston starts at quarterback, that might be good for Michael Thomas. I think Winston, is just he'll be able to target these guys deeper. He'll take shots, whereas Derek Carr I think is a little bit more passive. So I think it honestly might be a little bit of a boost for both Thomas and Olave if Jameis Winston does wind up starting for the Saints. We'll have to keep an eye on that again. But some other plays we could look to at wide receivers, some values. There's some value at this position. We got below 5K. Tank Dell, I think, is going to be a popular value play. He's been crushing the last few games. Targets have been really good. He's basically established himself as kind of the wide receiver 1/2 for the Texans. He's been playing a good amount of the snaps. He's been earning targets. The matchup against Pittsburgh, I think, is okay. I mean, we saw Pittsburgh's secondary get cooked by the Raiders on Sunday night. Both Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers had some good games. Not saying that I expect Tank Dell to go out there and put up 100-plus yards again, but clearly the guy is talented. He's still very cheap. He's going to project as a very good value play, I think. I think Adam Thielen's going to project as a pretty good value play as well. Thielen's been earning a lot of targets lately. Had a huge game last week against the Seattle. 14 targets, 11 catches for 145 yards and a touchdown. We're going to have to monitor the status of Bryce Young because I think if Bryce Young doesn't play, that's actually good for Adam Thielen. I think Andy Dalton being at quarterback is better for Thielen. Dalton, I think, is just he's got more experience than Bryce Young does. I think the Panthers are more willing to let Andy Dalton drop back and throw, whereas like Bryce Young, I feel like they're playing really conservative with Bryce Young. So if Andy Dalton's back at quarterback again this week, I think that's really good for Adam Thielen. Thielen's still cheap. It's a really good matchup against Minnesota. It's also a revenge game if you like to factor that in. So I like both Adam Thielen and Tank Dell for value. I think both these guys are going to project very well. I'm going to side with Thielen kind of in our first look lineup, but if you want to go with Dell, I don't hate that. I think both guys are really good plays. And then some other value plays you can maybe look to. There's not too much else down here that I really have a ton of interest in, but again, you do have Quentin Johnson you could go to. Obviously, Josh Palmer is 4K. You could play him. That's pretty much it, though, for value, I think, at wide receiver. Maybe a guy like Rashid Shaheed I could see going to, especially if Jameis Winston's at quarterback. I think Jameis Winston's definitely going to give Shaheed a couple deep balls, and if they connect on those, obviously Shaheed could pay off his price tag very easily on just one deep ball. But yeah, that's it for receiver. Let's go ahead and move on to tight end now. And for tight end, I don't think we're going to be able to really spend up here. I mean, we don't have a ton of spend up options anyways because there's no Travis Kelce on this slate. Most expensive tight end is TJ Hawkinson, 6,500. I think it's going to be tough to pay up for Hawkinson, at least like in cash games. Now for tournaments, if you want to stack him up with Kirk Cousins, by all means go ahead. But if we're talking about, kind of like an optimal build and what at least fits in our lineup, we're going to have to look a little bit cheaper. I think Mark Andrews at 5,400 looks solid. Don't love the matchup against Cleveland. Don't love that game environment, but we know how talented Andrews is. We know he's going to be a top target in that Ravens offense. He definitely stands out as a solid play at 5,400. We got Goddard at 4,400. Goddard's yet to really have a good game this season, but you have to think that's going to come at some point. He's cheap. Tyler Higbee continuing to earn a lot of targets without Cooper Kupp. Saw 5 targets on Monday night, 7 targets the game before that. He's only 4,200 as a value play. I think Tyler Higbee looks pretty solid. He was the guy that stood out to me at first look, at least at tight end. But there's some other guys that are in play down here, like Gerald Everett. Not going to plug Gerald Everett into our first look lineup because I don't want to do a triple stack. I don't really ever triple stack in GBPs, but I think Everett is going to project pretty well, especially with Mike Williams out for the rest of the season. He's definitely in play. You've got Dalton Kincaid, not had a great role, or at least fantasy-wise, he hasn't done a ton so far this season, but the snaps have still been solid for Kincaid. He's still been running routes. He's playable at 3,200. Cade Otton you could go to. Durham Smythe I played in my main lineup last week after Jalen Waddle got ruled out. If Jalen Waddle's out again, I could see going back to Durham Smythe. He's super cheap. But yeah, the guy that stood out to me at first look was definitely Tyler Higbee. I like plugging Tyler Higbee into our first look lineup at 4,200. And now we've got kind of our, what we can do with the rest of our lineup. So we got 8,400 left for our last two spots. We've got our double stack built. Justin Herbert, double stack with Keenan Allen and Josh Palmer, run back with Josh Jacobs. And then we have Alvin Kamara, Adam Thielen, and Tyler Higbee in our last three spots. Let's see if we can do something with this last spot. So we could kind of try and build like a correlated mini stack. Like we could try and play someone on the other side of that New Orleans game to correlate with Alvin Kamara. We could try and play someone on the other side of that Panthers game to correlate with Thielen, or we could try and play someone on the other side of that Rams game to correlate with Higbee. The guy that really stood out to me to correlate with Higbee was Zach Moss. Now, if we do play Zach Moss, that only leaves us 2,400 left for our last spot, so we would have to play like a really cheap defense. But I'm always fine paying down for defense. We could also play like Alexander Madison, correlate that with Adam Thielen, and that would leave us 2,600 left for defense. So then we could play a little bit more expensive defense. But like I said, I'm always fine paying down for a really cheap defense. I typically, I don't really ever pay for defense too often, just because defense is such a volatile position, such a tough position to predict. So let's correlate our Tyler Higbee tight end play with a play on the other side of that game. And my favorite play from the Colts is definitely Zach Moss. We talked about him earlier, how he's just getting all the opportunity at running back right now for the Colts. And if we play him in our final spot, that leaves us 2,400 left for defense. I mean, we could go with the Commanders against the Eagles. Don't love that spot. We could go with the Raiders against the Chargers. Don't love that one either. Or we could go with the Cardinals against the 49ers. I'm fine just playing the Cardinals defense against the 49ers. I mean, the Cardinals defense has been solid this season. They've been able to get pressure on the quarterback. They've been getting sacks. Brock Purdy, he's a young quarterback. He'll make some mistakes. I don't expect, Purdy to go out there and just completely suck. But for 2,200, if we get 6-7 points from our defense at this price tag, that's probably going to be fine. So this is what I like, guys. This is kind of our first look lineup. Again, we've got some correlation here. We've got our double stack built. So we got Justin Herbert, double stack with Keenan Allen and Josh Palmer, run back with Josh Jacobs. We have a correlated mini stack of Tyler Higbee and Zach Moss, and then we have Alvin Kamara as a one-off, Adam Thielen as a one-off, and then the Cardinals defense. So this is kind of our first look lineup for week 4, guys. Again, this is just kind of like a GBP lineup, talking through some stacks I like this week, some correlated mini stacks as well that you can build. Hopefully, though, this video did help you guys. I tried to go through each position, kind of talk through some plays I like this week while building out kind of a first look lineup. But again, I appreciate you guys watching these videos, supporting this DFS content. As always, if you guys enjoyed, hit that like button down below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button as well if you have not yet. And again, if you guys are new to the channel, if you have never checked out PrizePicks before, we are partnered up with PrizePicks. Again, PrizePicks is a DFS pick'em site. So on PrizePicks, it's very simple. You're just picking more or less on a player's projection. You can see some of the projections that they already have posted for Monday or for Sunday's games. They even have stuff up for Thursday night, for Monday night. They have passing yards up for the quarterbacks. They have rushing yards up for the running backs. Receiving yards are up as well. They'll add a ton more props, though, as we do get closer to the start of the games on Sunday. So take a look at their board, see if there's anything that stands out to you. And again, if you guys aren't on PrizePicks yet, use that promo code NOAH when you do sign up to get your first deposit matched up to $100. But that's all that I got for this week 4, guys. Appreciate you guys watching the content as always. We'll have a ton more content posted throughout the week. We'll cover the Thursday Night Football slate. We'll have a video for Showdown and a video for PrizePicks posted for that game. We'll have a PrizePicks video posted for the Sunday slate, and then we'll have stuff up for Monday Night Football as well, DFS content and PrizePicks content for Monday Night Football. So ton of more content coming out throughout the week. Make sure you guys are subscribed. Make sure you got those notifications on as well, so that way you never miss out on any new videos that I do post. But again, guys, good luck this week. Thanks for watching, supporting the content as always. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.